Story number 1. This happened when I was about 9 years old. We had just moved into our new home and everything was and still is great. For background, my younger brother has a learning and mental disability and tends to wander, so we had no choice but to put a lock on the outside of his bedroom door. He's not locked in there all the time, just when he's sleeping. He once made it out into the street before, so we don't take any chances. One night, I'm woken up by my brother singing. This isn't unusual at all. At Christmas, he would sing Jingle Bells for hours on end until he finally stopped due to exhaustion. Tiredly, I get up from my bed and go to his room to try and get him back to sleep. I have always been close with him, so it was pretty normal for me to do this from my mom. It only takes a few steps to reach his room, as our landing is small. Once I enter his room, I notice he's not in bed, but standing up towards the window, staring into our back garden. I decide not to turn on the light, as it might startle him. As I get closer, I realize what song he's singing. The Candyman song. At first I didn't think much of it. We had watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory that day, so I thought he had got it from there. I tell him to go back to bed as it's late, and we both have school in the morning. Candyman, he says, and points to the window. Confused, I look out the window, if nothing but to please him, when my heart dropped. There was someone in our back garden, dressed in all black and holding one of those spiral lollipops you get at the fair. I scream the fucking house down. My mom comes rushing in and I tell her to look out the window quickly. The man is still there and still waving that damn lollipop. My stepdad at the time gets a bat and charges downstairs while my mom calls the police. Unfortunately, the creep was able to get away before my stepdad can do any damage. I'm really spooked and decide to sleep in my brother's room that night. Big sister instincts, I guess. It was a week later when the police catch this creep at my brother's friend's house. He is also disabled, and the creep has that damned lollipop again. As I find out years later, this guy preyed on disabled young boys, as he assumed they would not tell anyone or no one would believe them. I thank God that we had a lock on his door, and that my brother sang that song that woke me up. It might have just saved his life. To this day, I have never been able to eat a lollipop. So Candyman, or whatever your name is, let's not meet. Story number 2. This happened when I was only 16. I had gotten my first real girlfriend, and she lived in the same neighborhood as I did. This meant that we didn't have to rely on driving to hang out. About a half-hour walk from my place is this abandoned lot. It was probably intended to be a neighborhood originally, but was never actually finished, or started for that matter. Because of this, it's basically a bunch of winding, smooth concrete paths that border small fields of incredibly tall grass. Although it was never started, a sewage area was added to it. It had a hole that was obviously deliberately made on the side of the fence, big enough for a relatively small person to fit through. The interesting part, however, was the unrealistic amount of new yet empty cans of beer and several empty food containers. There were enough cans strewn about the area to probably fill half of a dumpster. We'd hung out in there before, as it's generally pretty quiet. I joke with my girlfriend, I'll call her M for convenience, that a homeless guy probably lived here, and she would joke back and then tell me to stop. Prior to this story, I'd never felt uncomfortable inside of there. One day we decided to go there, as it had rained pretty hard the night before, so we couldn't hang out in the woods like we usually did. We walked there and sat inside, talking like usual. Today, for some reason, I felt slightly paranoid. I looked around the area a lot more and was a bit restless. Em asked me if I was okay a couple times, and I kept reassuring her that I was fine. Upon one of my glances, I noticed something that I hadn't before. Behind one of the metal poles supporting the fence boards was a dry brown paper bag stuffed between there and the board. It was one thing if there was a bunch of random trash around the place, but bags don't just get shoved into cracks by the wind. I knew that it was intentional. I started to get up to investigate the bag when my sliver of paranoia turned into a full-on metric ton of it. It had rained the night before, and the bag was dry. If you don't understand what this meant, it meant that someone had to have placed that there that day. I decided to not touch the bag, just in case it had drugs or a gun or something inside, and kept talking to M. The paranoia finally came to its climax when, while talking with M, I heard movement in the aforementioned tall grass nearby. I don't frequently go outside, but I could still tell when something was bigger than a small animal moving about. I covered M's mouth with my hand and motioned for her to be silent with my other, and listened for a minute, hearing the sound again, but louder. I pulled her close and whispered something along the lines of, "Do not move, do not make a sound, I'll be right back." She seemed confused, but nodded in agreement. I slowly and quietly creeped through the hole in the fence, walking out of view from the direction of the movement until I was far enough to see whatever was there. I will never forget what my eyes fell upon. In the direction of the movement, maybe 15 feet from the fenced area, was a middle-aged man in a red jacket and some blue jeans. He seemed fairly lanky, downright bony actually, with thin hair. That wasn't the scariest part, however. He was crawling on his stomach towards the fence. Terrified, I tried to begin moving back towards the hole when I realized that in my fear, I hadn't tried masking my footsteps. The man instantly stopped moving and swung his head to meet my eyes. Upon meeting my eyes, he quickly got up and started walking towards me. Terror turning into shock at this point, I was unable to move as he put one hand into his pocket to grip something, and his walk became a jog. The only thought that I could keep straight in my head was that of trying to figure out what to say to not be killed by the guy. I managed to speedwalk away from the fence and put some distance between me, the man, and M, and felt a little bit better until I turned around to see something even more terrifying. The man's jog was now a sprint. In all my life, I have never seen someone run as fast as he did. It was almost inhuman. I stopped walking, knowing fully well that I wasn't going to outrun the man, and resigned myself to whatever was going to happen. He closed the gap between us, probably 50+ feet, in a matter of seconds, and he stopped beside me, his hand holding whatever was in his pocket with a death grip. He finally said something. "Hey, can I ask you a question?" It was then that I noticed how much he was twitching, his inability to stand still, and his erratic voice, and realized that the bag that my paranoia told me was drugs might very well have been just that. Trying to keep my cool the best I could, I responded with, "Yeah, what's up?" Still twitching, he said, Why is it that you guys keep trying to follow me?" His voice had a suspicious and paranoid tone at this point, and I realized that if I wasn't very careful with what I said, he could snap at any moment. "We didn't know you were here, man. We just hang out here sometimes. It's all cool. We don't know who you are." "Hang out?" he replied, as if he had no idea what the phrase meant. I opened my mouth to elaborate, when he bolted at the same speed down the path that Em and I had taken to get here, disappearing around a turn. I shook off the shock and immediately pulled out my phone, dialing Em. She usually had her phone on silent, but I was incredibly lucky as she picked up relatively quickly. "Hello?" she said, confused. "Em, listen to me. Do not think about what I'm gonna say. Just do it. Fucking run. Right now. Run!" A couple seconds later, I saw her pop out of the fenced area and run to me. She asked what happened, and I promised to tell her later, but first we had to get out. Remember how I said that the lot was full of winding road and tall grass? This meant that the man could have been literally anywhere. Knowing fully well that the man most likely knew where we came from and was waiting to ambush us, I took her hand and bolted down an alternate route back to the road, leading back to our neighborhood, when I saw an abandoned couch that had been dumped there. Luck was again on my side, as it had been turned upside down. I grabbed one of the boards of the frame, and taking advantage of the massive amounts of adrenaline pumping through me, ripped it out of the couch, several nails still attached at the end. M's hand in one hand, my makeshift weapon in the other, we hurried to the road through the longer detour, when we finally reached our destination. From our location, we could see our original route, and I took a cautionary look, gripping the blunt weapon tightly, almost dropping it in shock. In the grass of the original road we took, I could see a distinctly red shape, and a hand holding something metal. Em started to turn to look, and saw what I saw too. We ran back home, miraculously unharmed. I don't believe in miracles or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't decided to take the long way around, we both could have been killed. So, homeless druggy psychopaths, let's not meet. Story number 3. So about 9 years ago, making me 16, I was staying with some friends whilst me and my mom had a cooling off period, after constant arguments and fights. We were too similar and were always clashing over the smallest of things. I actually stayed with my friend for about 2 months, as the calm atmosphere was good for me. Chaos and drama followed my mom all throughout her life, and I hated it so much. I thought I hated her for a while too. Teen angst, I guess. Towards the end of me living with my friend in a nice and relaxed atmosphere, mine and my mom's relationship started to get better. Distance makes the heart grow fonder and all that. I texted her to say I would pop over for a visit and see how she was, and if this time apart was as happy and relaxing as it was for me. I know this doesn't seem like a normal mother-daughter relationship, but my mom was quite an intense individual, and this seeped into her parenting skills. She seemed weird and off with me when she replied, quite snappy and cold. We had stayed in touch obviously while I was away, and although her mom skills weren't great, she still liked to stay involved best as she could to make sure I was doing okay, which made this text seem weird, but like I said, we did argue and clash, so I assumed she was having one of her off days. Me being me and only 16 at the time, took offense and thought, fine, be that way. So I didn't go over and see her or reply to her cold text, I just left it. Had I just listened to my first instinct that the text was weird, things would have been very different. I was very stubborn and didn't get in touch with her for another week or so. I waited until she got in touch. I was at my friend's house doing revisions for exams when her mom came up to her room to get me. She told me my mom was at the door, but the look on her face scared me. She looked very worried and it alarmed me. I hurried down the stairs to the front door to see my mom. She looked horrendous. Her usually long, beautiful hair had been hacked off to short and uneven lengths. Her eyes were swollen and black and blue. She had deep cuts all over her face and neck, and bruising just everywhere. I burst into tears. I couldn't stop shaking. It was the worst moment of my life to see her like that. My friend's mom made her come inside and sit down and was fussing over her. My mom told me on the day I had text to say I was coming over, 3 drug addicts had broken into her house and terrorized her for hours and hours. They had cut her hair off with a knife. They had lifted our TV up and broke it over her back. One of the addicts had held a knife to her stomach and tried to stab her, but my mom held them away with her legs, all the while wetting herself. It was absolutely heartbreaking and terrifying to listen to, and I didn't think it would be this hard to type out and read back to myself. I think the thing that breaks my heart the most still to this day was one of the people holding her hostage had read my message and was going to reply to try to lure me there, but my mom begged and begged, crying and screaming that this guy finally gave up and sent me the message that I received that day. I have never forgiven myself for not thinking more into it, and just going around to the house anyway. After the ordeal, they had trashed the house and took some things and went on their way. My mom called the police and was taken to the hospital, where she was for a week, and all the while I was in selfish mode, thinking my mom was a dick and how I was better off away from her. She said she never wanted me to see her in hospital, as she knew it was an important time with my exams. As it was a small town we lived in, she recognized who 2 of these people were, and was able to identify them, resulting in all 3 going to prison. One of the attackers was a woman with children. The judge didn't go lightly on them due to a long list of previous convictions, which we were obviously happy about. It's not often the victim of such an attack is granted such justice. Story number 4. Some years ago, I worked in a nightclub in a UK city. Although initially I only agreed to work several nights per week, after a while I was working 5 or 6. It sucked a bit, but my colleagues were excellent banter, and I needed the money. We were bar staff, but had to take turns venturing out to collect glasses and clean up, etc. This club was quite colorful, the type of place where furniture is bolted down and everything possible was plastic to avoid use in fights. Free entry till 3 a.m. every night, and buy one get one free cheap drink. Nights without fights, thieving, or people being inappropriate in various places were rare enough. You get an idea about the type of environment of this story. As the place was often chaos, even the legion of door staff couldn't be on top of everything. One night when I wasn't working, I had time to kill before meeting friends at a local bar, so I stopped by to see friends there who were working. I didn't notice this guy at the time, but he must have been lurking about. Later, when the pubs shut, drunken friends wanted to keep dancing, so they dragged me back there. I was tired, so I went to find a seat while they lurched about like idiots. There were only 3 or 4 big booths in total. Strangers often got squashed in together, as the seating was limited unless you went upstairs. Some guy moved and pointed that I could sit on the edge of the booth. I figured he was just being polite, so I sat down and said thank you. I sat on the edge of the booth with my back to him, watching my drunken fools on the floor. He kept trying to talk, but it was loud, and I wasn't interested in conversation. He was much older than me, middle-aged, Indian or Arabic, and I was 19. At this stage, I should say I have some difficulties with interpreting people's tones and expressions. I find social things awkward and struggle with anxiety. Recently, my counselor wanted to test me for autistic tendencies. I just wanted to clarify that maybe I missed some indications or didn't react as I should have. It has been known to happen. It was getting late and my friend fell on his arse, and so it was decided the time had come to go home. Nothing untoward happened at this point. The trouble started not long after, however. I start seeing this guy in the club often when I'm working. Maybe I didn't notice initially. Many people come and hang around frequently, but I start to notice him. He's there nearly every night. At first he is lurking just in a dark corner on the opposite side of the bar staring. Then he's sitting in a booth staring. Eventually he is standing in front of my till for extended minutes, just staring at me. Not ordering, just staring. I tell him to move. He's obstructing the customers, so he steps to one side and keeps staring. Every time some colleagues come near, he melts away into the crowds. This happens again and again. I look up and find him there. I learned afterwards from other staff that on nights I didn't work, he was there harassing other barmaids, asking where I am, information about me, all sorts. He told them he was my classmate or my friend visiting from another place. Some idiot actually gave him my email address, and he starts emailing me in all capital letters, very bad English, telling me how I am his one and only Rose, love of his life, the princess in his heart. All this very weird shit. I ignored the emails and tried to think of what I should do. Not having a car and my bike being stolen, I had to walk to and from work. One night, I stopped at a 24-hour shop near my flat, and when I came out, he was there. He started trying to make conversation and tailing me to my building. I didn't know how I can get rid of him. I was actually rude on purpose. He laughed. Instead of my building, I went to the next one and pretended it was my place. He started on about a goodnight kiss and I refused. He tried to back me into a corner and kiss me. I panicked and turned my head. He more or less missed, but I could feel his breath on me. I jumped sideways and got through the door, but I had to promise to reply to his emails to get him to go away. I spent a long time in that stairwell before I went to my own building. That freaked me out, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have many close friends, no partner. My family weren't in the same country, and I don't talk about much with them anyway. My flatmate was rarely home, and we had a difficult relationship. I talked only with her when there was no choice. I should have called police, but I was distrustful. I didn't feel I could go to my boss or supervisor, as they were very harsh, and I didn't communicate well with them. He didn't do anything for a while except help me with emails and Yahoo messages. I did warn my flatmate to be on the lookout for anyone skulking. Things went more or less back to normal. I didn't see him and began to forget about it. Work went on, studying went on. My flatmate and I kept falling out. One night when she had come home, we fought, and I decided I would go to the club to get away from her. I could sit at the end of the bar and have a beer, talk to my workmate while she was working on the glasses, etc. I did not see him, but something happened. My colleagues saw me have 2 beers. I felt fine and seemed fine to them. About 11 p.m. I left feeling tired, though I don't remember it. I have no idea what happened next. I think I went to the local folk club for a while. I last remember walking in that direction. Next thing I know, I wake up 4 p.m. in the afternoon, covered in bruises in my flat, feeling like I was going to die. My flatmate was irate, as was the landlord, who drove there to go a bit nuts at me for insulting the neighbors. It seems that at about 3:30 a.m. I showed up at the building, eventually managed to get inside somehow, tried to get into the wrong flat, then fell down and wet myself. Flatmate was terrified as she couldn't wake me up. To this day I don't know what happened, but I hadn't been assaulted. I was not taking drugs and had only those 2 beers, so my assumption was that I was spiked but had gotten away from the person before they could see where I went. Having no memory of those hours was terrifying. I must have been just wandering about somewhere or passed out in a heap. I reported it to work, but the boss shrugged it off. Flatmate, etc. accepted that it wasn't my fault, but I did not feel that they believed me, and I thought police would be the same. Nothing more happened for a while, but I did explicitly tell my colleagues to look out for that guy, and also not to tell anyone anything about me. I also talked with the door staff and new supervisor. The door staff in particular were concerned. Many female students worked there and had to walk home. One night close to closing, I thought I saw him, but I couldn't be sure. I continued my usual routine, cleaning the bar, loading the dishwasher, brushing the floor, etc. Supervisor came to me and asked about the creepy man. Then she told me that I should not leave the building under any circumstances. He had tried to come in a little before last entry and asked the doorman about me. They denied him and told him not to return, so he apologized politely and left the premises, but they watched him. He walked down the street and into an alleyway I would have to pass on the way home. 2 of the doormen were suspicious and slipped out to walk past the alley. They found him lurking there in the dark, waiting behind a bin. They warned him in the strongest terms to stay away from anyone at this club and from the entire street. Another bartender told me they beat the living daylights out of him. The supervisor took me out the back door and took me home in her car. I quit soon after. I know now the police should have been involved, but I am just thankful that nothing worse happened. Now I am much more attuned in and aware of what I should do. but I hope that sharing here might help people be aware of what creepy people can be around. Story number 5. About 5 months ago, a friend of mine got expelled from his program because of bad marks. He was only halfway through his lease, and he didn't see a point of staying in the city since he was only here for school. He told me that if I wanted to take over his lease as a subletter, he would only charge me half of the rent, which I thought was a pretty sweet deal. So naturally, although I am from this town, I thought it was time to leave my parents' place. I had already graduated, and although I had been looking for a new job for a while, I still felt like I couldn't miss out on the opportunity. So I took over his lease and moved into his place. The house itself is actually pretty nice. It's 3 floors, including the basement, and it's located near the university of my town, which is not a very safe area overall, but I spent a lot of my university years here and never felt unsafe. The room in the basement is pretty small but cozy, and the only other room down here is a girl who is currently a student, and she's pretty quiet. Actually, all the girls living here are pretty good roommates. I wasn't thrilled about living with 3 girls, but now I don't see why I would have thought it was an issue. They're all pretty great and have a good time. I'm the only one in the house who is not a student, and also the only one who is originally from this town. The other roommates are actually all from cities that are only about an hour or 2 away at most, so unless there's something special going on, they all go home on weekends. My friend who got expelled also only lives 2 hours away, so he would always go home for the weekend as well. One thing I forgot to mention, which is pretty crucial to the story, is that the house actually has 5 rooms, but right when they all moved into the new place together, one of the girls had a seizure on her bed and passed away. This was pretty upsetting for everyone, and the landlord told them not to worry about finding anyone else. The rent never went up or anything, and the room was left vacant. According to the landlord, he just found it so insensitive to try and find someone because he didn't want to turn someone's death into a financial inconvenience for him. So after the girl's death, the parents came and took her belongings out of the room, and it just remained empty since then. I actually never looked in there because it just remained locked, and I don't really have much curiosity to see the room. It's on the 2nd floor, and I never go up there, so I never paid any attention to it. The first weekend I spent there was pretty uneventful. I remember that I spent one night at my boyfriend's place, and then the next night he slept over after we went out drinking at one of the college bars near the place. We were pretty wasted, so we passed out as soon as we got home. The next weekend I was at home in my new room, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to read a little bit. I was really enjoying the quietness of this new house since the girls weren't home at all. I come from a Latino family, so this quiet and serene environment was pretty rare. I thought that I heard a few noises upstairs, so I figured that one of the girls had probably decided to stay the weekend at the house, or she was just getting last-minute things ready before heading home. I really didn't think much of this thing. I wasn't very close with the roommates, so I didn't even bother asking any of them if they had stayed home. I just felt like it was none of my business. The girl in the basement was for sure gone for the weekend because she apparently sleeps with her door locked and keeps it open when she's not home. One weekend, that same month, I woke up to pee, and I could hear a toilet flushing upstairs, which was kind of weird since I knew none of the girls were home. I was going to go check it out, but in my tired state I was too lazy and just didn't care enough. It's funny, horror movies are supposed to make you paranoid, but the biggest lesson I got from them was that there's always a rational explanation for things. This would prove to be my biggest mistake, because for a couple of months I was always brushing things off and ironically creating irrational explanations to rationalize what I thought were irrational thoughts. For example, I heard creaking coming from the 2nd floor and figured one of the girls must have forgotten something and decided to come by to pick it up. The girl must have driven 2 hours down and 2 hours back to her town in the middle of the night to pick something up. One Saturday, I woke up to get some water and I noticed that the roommate in the basement was gone. Her door was open and her car was not in the driveway. There weren't any cars in the driveway, but I should mention that one of the girls doesn't drive. A couple hours later I woke up because I heard steps coming down into the basement. At this point I yelled out the girl's name who doesn't drive because she is the only one who could have been in the house. I didn't get a reply and just heard the steps going back upstairs. At this point I started getting uneasy about being home on weekends, so I decided to just spend them at my boyfriend's house. One of the girls made a house Facebook page, which was supposed to address any issues like washing dishes or leaving messes, but it remained pretty inactive since everyone seemed to get along. I posted on there that some creepy stuff was happening on weekends and asked them if they could start just letting me know if they'd be home for the night or not. They seriously thought I was joking around. The replies were not receptive at all and consisted of, "laugh my ass off," or, "oh my god, you're so funny." Even my boyfriend agreed that I was being paranoid because he too believed that everything has a rational and perfect explanation. The thing is, When you say that everything has an explanation, you are only invalidating paranormal explanations or ghostly activity, which is not what I was implying at all. I have never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that jazz, and I never claimed to when I spoke to my roommates or to my boyfriend. They kept on saying that the house was old and made noises, but I know the difference between old house noises and someone walking down the stairs and back up the stairs. Fortunately, my roommates did start posting things on the Facebook page to let me know that they'd be gone. It was always to the effect of, "Hey, LOL, I won't be home this weekend, so don't worry about the ghosts." One weekend, they all let me know that they would not be home, and my boyfriend was on the midnight shift, so I had to spend the night on my own. My boyfriend called me on his break, and while I was on the phone with him, I heard noises on the main floor. I told him I was going to check it out, and he told me to go ahead, because the motherfucker still thought I was being paranoid. As I said this, I heard the footsteps going back up to the second floor. Once I got onto the main floor, there was nobody in the kitchen, and all the doors into the house were locked. I was extremely paranoid and did not feel safe. My boyfriend calmed me down and convinced me that everything was okay, so I never went to the second floor, and it's probably best that I stayed on the main floor. After that weekend, I told my roommates in all seriousness that I was convinced that someone had been in our house at some point that night. I told them what I heard, and the fucking bitches still claimed that it was the old house making noises. My boyfriend was almost permanently on midnights, so I did what I never wanted to do and started spending weekends at my parents' place. The girls still posted on the page whether or not they were leaving the house or not, and I decided that I should do the same, so I also started posting when I was and was not sleeping at the house. One Friday night, the Facebook page looked something like this: Roommate 1 not sleeping at home, Roommate 2 not sleeping at home, Roommate 3 staying home because of midterm exams, me staying at my parents' place. The next morning, I received a frantic text from one of the roommates saying that the roommate with the midterms had been attacked. Apparently she was in her room studying and heard a noise right outside of her bedroom. When she went out to inspect it, she was greeted by a man walking out of the dead girl's room. I later found out more details about the whole thing from the roommate who was attacked. The man looked rough, greasy hair, and just a dirty, dirty face. When they made eye contact, he held his finger up to his mouth and uttered a small shh while smiling. The nail on his finger was long, and his beard was apparently really scraggly and uneven, like it only grew on certain parts of his face. She screamed out of instinct, even though she knew there was nobody in the house. He lunged at her as she tried to shut the door, and she wasn't beaten up too badly. He just growled and told her to shut her mouth and said something like, "I'm not gonna rape you, but shut your mouth." He beat her, but not completely unconscious, and then when he walked out of her room, he went downstairs and walked out the front door, so he left the dead girl's room unlocked. My roommate locked herself in her room and called the police, who were there immediately. What's pretty creepy about the whole thing is that when they inspected the dead girl's room, they kept asking for clarification. So nobody has lived in this room for how long? Nobody has been renting this room, right? Did the parents take everything after the girl passed away? The guy had a really sweet setup actually, and had brought his own small mattress to put over the bed frame. Obviously the mattress was too small for the bed frame. He left most of his stuff because he probably didn't expect a confrontation that night. I don't think he knew she would be there that night because she never was. It probably sucked for him when I moved in because before me, the bastard had the whole house to himself 2 days a week. The police did ask me a lot of questions and were very interested in hearing my statement about hearing footsteps at night. My 3 roommates and my friend are now convinced that maybe the girl didn't die the way they said she did, and maybe he murdered her. But I think the autopsy would have been able to distinguish a murder from a seizure. In their defense, the whole thing is really creepy. We're not really sure how long the guy had been living here, but it's very likely that it has been for at least a few months. The theory is that the guy has been climbing in through the window, so it's possible that he was even there at times when all of us were there. The police are really interested in talking to the landlord because they want to know how the man found out about the vacant room. The landlord is a pretty decent guy, so I don't know if there's anything going on there. I don't even feel an "I told you so" attitude from this whole thing. I think that I'm just glad that the girl is okay because she seemed pretty shaken up. I just wish people were more willing to listen to me when I told them that I thought somebody was coming into our home. I even said it might be a squatter, which everyone laughed at. This happened very recently, so it might be a while before an update. As of now, the man has not been found, but the police remain optimistic about finding him, whatever that means. This has been a pretty terrible month for me, and I don't know if I want to be at this house anymore. I don't have much left on the lease, and I recently lost my job, so it might be best for me to leave the place now. I doubt the guy will come back because all of his stuff has been taken out, but I still find it creepy in this house. I definitely don't spend weekends here anymore. Story number 6. I've never really been one to post anything this personal on the internet before, but I think it's time to finally make these feelings known that I could never admit to a therapist. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I'm a generally kind young woman that tries my best to see the good in people and just try to make it through life with friends instead of connections. But this woman, this sick fucking woman, almost changed my outlook on everything. Just some backstory. My father was once married to a very kind, funny, and religious woman. They had around 7 kids. He later cheated on her, they divorced, which was hard on her because she didn't normally believe in it, but she divorced him, and he remarried a fellow veteran, another sweet, kind, and funny woman. That was my mom. They had 2 kids together, including me, making me the youngest, of 13 people, with the oldest for now being around 42. Unfortunately, he cheated on my mother with another woman. We'll just call her M. I know very little about her now. Before, I just thought she was another nice woman that my father liked. But she was different from the others. She had a past that I still don't know, and she started showing her true colors as a sick, violent, manipulative fucking psychopath. They would be together for a while, which later had my father divorce my mother. It wasn't too hard on me because I knew about the affair, and it would even be a discussion over dinner between just me and her. After they divorced, Mom even mentioned that they high-fived outside the divorce office and got some ice cream, so all seemed well. My parents divorced, my father was happy, my mom had a job she was comfortable with. All seemed good, which is always when the shit hits the fan. Sometimes me and my siblings would stay at my father and M's house. All would be fine, but if there was ever an argument between Dad and M, things would get scary. At first it would be some strained talking, later yelling. After M starts yelling, we would go to either the rooms or the basement, which was sort of like a man cave. The yelling would turn to screaming, which is when Dad would come upstairs and take us home. But I would still see the knife marks on his neck. M was abusive. The stupid thing about my dad is he would go back to her. Cut to years later, Dad was still with M, but my grandfather on my dad's side passed away from cancer. Dad needed to find a job to take care of my grandmother down in Texas, because we lived in Wisconsin. This didn't sit well with M, but she did have to live with it. After a while, she went down to Texas with Dad when he invited her to stay. That never sat well with me, but if grandmother was there, maybe it would be fine. I still don't know what went down in Texas. After a long time, I never saw Dad. Sometimes we would get phone calls, so that was enough for me. But the day that I will always remember, the day my father passed away, it was just a week before my 16th birthday. He was driving to work to college. Unfortunately, a drunk driver was driving on the wrong side of the highway and head-on collided into my father's vehicle. Both drivers died on impact. I remember my mom waking me up, and when she sat on the edge of my bed, I knew something was wrong. The day was so quiet, because there was nothing to say. Mom knew that we had to go down to Texas for my own father's funeral. We packed up and made the long drive from Wisconsin to Texas. It was the worst funeral I've ever gone to. It was run by M. She made the funeral start 5 minutes ahead, so his own kids were 5 minutes late. She got rid of the VIP seats for his kids. The pastor turned the funeral into a sermon instead of focusing on his family. Nobody knew we were his kids, and to kick us while we were down, there was a charity for his kids, known as Officer Dad's name, father of 9 children. People were donating, but M didn't tell us about it. We found out about it around a month after M claimed the money. She got every last penny that was supposed to go to his kids. Mom had to quit her job because it was 8 months behind on payment. My dad was gone. 2 of my siblings were going to college. I still had 2 more years of high school. Mom had to take care of me and my 3 older siblings with no job. She later had to work 3 jobs just to take care of me and for tuition for my brothers. After a few years, my mom finally got a great job, which was ironically the same building my father used to work at as a police officer in Wisconsin. Although M tried to take that job from Mom because M also used to work there. I'm in college, with my father's passing slowly going behind me. I wasn't even thinking about M until just last week. I was on spring break and my mom and I decided to go to the mall. We were talking about Dad, and she told me something I'll never forget and never forgive. My father would go to many surgeries for his knee. One day while living with M, he couldn't move because of the surgery, and he needed to give my mom a check for child support. Because of how awkward it would have to be for Mom to go over there with M in the house, Dad asked if she could go out between 1 to 3 p.m. M wasn't happy with that. While my dad was bedridden and couldn't move, she actually pinned him down and choked him. My own father, who was stuck in bed, was being choked by a woman he married. She was arrested but was paid bail, and Dad still went back to her. Hearing that made me cry the whole drive there. It also made me swear vengeance on her. I wished to find her and let her know that family is not just a name. It's not just who you're born with, it's who you would die for. And if she knew that, then she would have never fucked with mine. I'm sorry if this brought you down at all. I just wanted people to know the story and to let you know, just because your parent likes them, you need to make sure that person isn't some psycho. You need to do whatever it takes to protect not only your parent, but to protect your whole family.